Welcome to Rebel Spirit Radio, exploring the frontiers of spirituality, consciousness, the esoteric, and humanity's sacred relationship with the living earth. I'm your host, Nick Mather, and in this episode, I speak with Mark Horne, author of Tarot and the Gates of Light. Mark's book details a Kabbalistic method of using the Tarot as a meditative tool during a Jewish ritual known as counting the Omer, which takes place between the holidays of Passover and Pentecost. Mark draws from a variety of the world's wisdom traditions to guide readers through a path of spiritual and psychological cleansing. We discuss all of this, as well as the Kabbalistic tree of life, grounding spirituality in this world, and the necessity of community and spiritual practice. Mark Horne is the author of Tarot and the Gates of Light, a Kabbalistic path to liberation. He's studied Kabbalah with academic, rabbinic, and practical teachers in organizations ranging from the highly respected to the highly unorthodox. He has also studied Tarot with many of today's most respected authorities on the subject, including Rachel Pollack, Mary Greer, and Robert Place. Myth and sacred story have always been central to Mark's spiritual path, and he uses both as a performing storyteller and a Tarot guide. He applies his understanding of the archetypes in sacred stories from all traditions to the individual spiritual path of clients as they are revealed in readings. His fiction has appeared in the anthology Charmed Lives, Gay Spirit and Storytelling, and he has written feature articles for the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, and Metro Source. Mark, welcome to Rebel Spirit Radio.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Well, I'm very happy to have you here today. I wanted to congratulate you on your book, Tarot and the Gates of Life. I've read a few books on Tarot and Kabbalah, and quite often they tend towards the, shall we say, the inscrutable. But I found your book to be very accessible. It's incredibly well written and deeply personal. You draw deep from your own spiritual journey to inform this work, but it's never narcissistic. That's not the point here. It's just to elicit examples. And you also take a very different approach to Tarot and Kabbalah, which I appreciate and want to explore. But first, let's start with you. You have a very interesting spiritual journey. The book begins with you saying that you left Judaism the day after your bar mitzvah, and you end up going back to it. So what was this journey like?
Oh, goodness. Well, I walked away from Judaism the day after my bar mitzvah because even at 13, I knew I was gay. And in the mid-1960s, that was not really very acceptable in any major faith tradition in the United States. So I decided it was important that I find a spiritual path that accepted my love as sacred, because even though at 13 I had yet to actually have any experience, I had a sense that, that the love is a sacred thing, and that I wanted to see if there were a path that recognized the way that I wanted to love as a sacred path. So I went off in search and found myself in, reading all of the things that people do. I studied mythology, I studied Buddhism, I got into tarot, I ended up chanting with the Guru Maharaji people for a little while. Because after all, it was the mid to late 60s, and all of this stuff was happening.
And you explored Buddhism for a while too. You describe yourself as I guess the term that kids are using these days is a Jubu, correct?
Well, I don't know if the kids are using it, but I think that Roger Kamenetz, when he wrote The Jew in the Lotus,
okay,
90s, he was already using the term back then. And this was a book about how a number of American rabbis went to meet with the Dalai Lama to sort of figure out why all of these young Jews were going to Buddhism. And so this book was about that dialogue. It was very rich. And I actually ended up studying with every one of those rabbis in that book.
Oh, wonderful. Very good. And you still incorporate, you've since returned to Judaism. And what led you back? If I understand correct, it was this introduction to Kabbalah, right?
Well, not really. I mean, when I started learning a very little bit about Kabbalah
Mhm.
when I was 16 and got my first tarot deck.
Okay.
But like you, I found everything written on the subject highly inscrutable.
Mhm.
And I decided that it was not necessary if I wanted to study tarot, and I'd walked away from Judaism anyway, so goodbye, right?
Mhm.
And but then I said I got deeply into Judaism. I'm sorry, into Buddhism. I was living in Japan and had found Vipassana Buddhism,
Mhm.
which is actually Southeast Asian, and really started going on retreats very regularly, so regularly that I started, in fact, to learn Pali, which is the language of the Buddha. And I found myself laughing in the middle of one such retreat, thinking, how is it that I couldn't bring myself to learn, biblical Hebrew, but now I'm learning, the precursor language to Hindi,
Mhm.
right? It was bizarre to me, but it was also, a very extraordinary experience. And the deeper I got in Buddhism, oddly enough, the more I felt that my soul at rock bottom was Jewish,
Hmm.
and I needed to explore this. So I spoke to a friend of mine who had been on a similar journey, but she had come back to Judaism. She showed me some prayer books, and she said, "Just look at these prayers, the translations in English." And I said, "Oh, these look like meditation instructions." And she said, "Yeah, right,
Hmm.
But I said, "I don't know any rabbis who teach it that way." And she said, I live in North Carolina, and I did. So you live in New York. You should be able to find some rabbis who get this."
Hmm.
So I went off in search. And that's how I actually got back into Kabbalah on the Jewish side,
Okay.
and with Jewish teachers who weren't about making it inscrutable, but really having it, because, and there are a lot of reasons that historically that it is written about in ways that make it dense and complicated and secretive.
Hmm.
But there's no reason for that anymore. And this is an immensely practical, what I'll even call is a philosophy of how the world works, and really how all of creation happens. And when I started to learn it with the rabbis, then I realized, oh, wait a minute, I can put this back with the tarot now in a way that I hadn't before. And because I was learning it in relationship, learning Kabbalah in relationship to Jewish practice, I realized that all of the Kabbalistic writing from the tarot world were from people who didn't have this Jewish experience, so that there were certain practices that they were just unaware of. Particularly the practice that my book is about, which is counting the Omer, is a traditional Jewish practice with a deep Kabbalistic uh, part of it that you do for 49 days. And there was no reference to it in any tarot books anywhere. And I thought, this is an important practice. It's something that if people do it, I mean, I did it before actually connecting it with tarot, and I found it a profound experience that took me deep within and helped open up doors that were closed in my soul, and just it was beautiful, beautiful thing to do. And I thought, okay, let's see if we can do this with tarot. So I did it myself for several years, writing about it in a blog that I used to have called Another Queer Jewish Buddhist, because there are so many of us, in fact, starting with Allen Ginsberg, for example. But, I realized as I was writing about it, this was a book. So I decided that's what I would do. And that's the genesis of the book, and how I sort of came back to Judaism, and how I got back into Kabbalah and put it all together.
Okay, wonderful. And you used a phrase in the book which I really appreciated. I too have been exploring tarot since I was 16. Before we began recording here, I told you, that I also was a gay 16-year-old, very closeted gay 16-year-old when I purchased my first tarot deck, and I've read them off and on for years. It was a few years ago as I was finishing up my dissertation, I just felt called to revisit Tarot or to get deeper into it. And I knew that there were these connections with Kabbalah and the other Western esoteric traditions. And the way I was thinking about it is, okay, I'm going to use the Tarot as a book to study these things. But the wording that you used, which I think was way more appropriate, is that there are esoteric flashcards. So there is this history between Tarot and Kabbalah, but I want to kind of take a step back, especially for any listener who's not really familiar with all of this. And I'm going to hit you up with some of the big questions here.
Okay.
Which is, if someone is unfamiliar with both Tarot and Kabbalah, how do you explain them? What are they?
Oh, well, I'll start with Kabbalah.
Sure.
And say it is the Jewish mystical tradition. Every religious tradition has a mystical strain, and Kabbalah is the Jewish version of that. That's the 5-second explanation. Tarot is a card game that developed out of 14th, 15th century Italy, and over time somehow got connected to divination, and then historically over the centuries, really a lot of study and work went into making it an extraordinary tool of self-examination, not merely divination, but a way to examine one's own soul. And then, then there's the question of how did Kabbalah and Tarot come together? There are a lot of sort of historical clues that one can follow back. One of the reasons my book is titled Tarot and the Gates of Light is because there was a Kabbalistic treatise written in the 13th century by a very famous rabbi about the Sephirot, sort of a Kabbalistic concept. And it was determined by a scholar, Ronald Decker, I believe, in his book, The Esoteric Tarot. He was actually able to trace in the very first book of divinatory meanings of the Tarot minor arcana, phrases that came straight from Gates of Light. So now, how did this person who wrote this book come to these phrases? Because he didn't speak Hebrew or Latin, as far as we know. And he said that he learned this from a traveling Italian. So this is shrouded in mystery. Although what I will say is that right now I am spending a lot of time studying the history of the great houses of the Renaissance, the Medici, the Sforza, the Visconti, because all of them had employed scribes and artists. And in their workshops of scribes and artists, there were Hebrew scribes, because all of these families owned Kabbalistic manuscripts. And in these very same workshops, people were producing tarot cards. So I think, I have no proof, there's no smoking gun yet, but I have to think that there were people in these workshops who looked at these two systems and said, oh, we could put them together. And in fact, if you wanted to study the Kabbalistic system with flashcards, you could actually use the tarot with certain symbols that are connected to the Kabbalah and make it a sort of a system of learning these Kabbalistic concepts. Is that what happened? We have absolutely no smoking gun proof, but it looks pretty good.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I would very much look forward to the fruits of your research on that. I know that some of the decks are, I think some of the earliest decks that have figures, aren't they based on some of these families? Or at least that was one of the rumors that I've read.
Oh yes, so some of the families, like the images in there, they're portraits of the people in the family. Remember, they use these cards for games. So this is why some of them aren't really in the best condition today. But they were also, like almost all of the art of that time, allegorical. So, there were cards which were figures, and this is the Renaissance, so they were bringing back in mythology. But, you had the virtues, right?
Mhm.
So, fortitude, strength, temperance, and these are all tarot cards, right? But they made them into cards in this deck. There's a lot of research by Robert Place on this subject related to that.
Very interesting. Um, to dig a little bit deeper, you used a term, and this is central to your book, and I want to make sure that everyone is familiar with what this means. Sephirot. So I think that to understand that, we have to dig into the tree of life. So, can you explain the
What
tree of
I,
life and
what
the
I,
Sephirot?
what I tell everybody who I do readings for, and I just finished a reading a half an hour ago. And what I say to everyone is, are you familiar with the chakra system?
Mhm.
Because almost everybody is. And I say, well, if you were to overlay the tree of life on the chakra system, you would notice that the top sephirah, which is the singular,
Mhm.
on the tree of life, is called keter, and it means crown. And if you and it is meant to be overlaid on the human body, it's right at the top of the head. Tiferet is at the space of the heart chakra, and it is the heart. So all of these are really about, one way of looking at them is about energy centers in the body and how the energy flows from the divine straight through us into manifestation. And all of these sephirot are sort of, each of them has a different job, as it were, of sort of transforming this energy. Another metaphor I use is that of the power plant. If you were to sort of touch a wire coming out of a power plant, you would be electrocuted in a minute. So we have all of these transformers all along the way, which step the energy down so that when you plug in your lamp to the socket in your home, it is usable, right? And you're not going to die, and it's not going to blow up. So the Sephirot are kind of like step down transformers from the divine energy through us so that it can actually work through us. And except, of course, all of us, the energy gets blocked in different ways, in the ways in our experience and in our various incarnations, because many people are surprised to know this, but in mystical Judaism and Kabbalah, reincarnation is just a given, right? We all come back life after life, and we're working through, not really very different from Buddhism. And so you're going to also carry some of this, to use a word from another tradition, karmic energy in these sephirot. And when I do a tree of life reading for people, I am looking at how that energy moves through them and where it's blocked and what they can do to sort of restore the flow.
And the tree of life and the Sephirot. So you're saying that it's this divine energy that's flowing through the body, but it's also flowing through all of creation as well, correct?
This is, you can think of the diagram of the tree of life as like the double helix of DNA.
Mhm.
And when you see the diagram of the tree of life on a flat piece of paper, it is flat, but it is not flat. It is a, three-dimensional thing. And within each sephirah, there's another whole tree within it, and ad infinitum, all the way down and all the way up.
Mhm.
So it is a sort of philosophy of the fractal nature of reality,
Mhm.
and really sort of connects to the Hermetic dictum, as above, so below, because all of these systems are reflections of each other. And so that when you study the universe or physics, really the tree of life is very much a part of that. And there's the Kabbalistic creation story is how the divine, which is referred to as Ein Sof, that is the endless no thing. Because like the Christian via negativa, the divine, I don't like to use the word God very much because we have a concept about that. The divine is beyond concept, beyond the ability to think. We cannot name it, we cannot describe it. But as the energy from that flows into manifestation, where was I going with this?
Well, we're talking about the fractal nature of.
I was actually talking about creation itself.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Yes.
So the very first time from the energy flowed from Ein Sof into what became creation, the Sephirot were not in the relationship that you see in the diagram today. They ran in a straight line. And as I was talking about, explaining how, think of them as step-down transformers, well, in this straight line, they couldn't hold the energy. So the Sephirot shattered, sending sparks of this divine energy throughout all of creation. And Kabbalistically speaking, this is the way 500 years ago, the Rabbi Isaac Luria was describing the Big Bang, right? This is how we understand Kabbalistically how the universe began. But because all of this energy then shattered, what it means is all of the energy that we see, everything around us, is a piece of the divine that is just broken off. And it is our mission as human beings to work in partnership with the divine to raise these sparks up, to restore them and to restore all of creation to wholeness. And the goal of a Kabbalist is what we call messianic consciousness, which is an understanding and an experience of everything as divine, and everything is connected to the whole.
Very good. And I love another way that you describe the Sephirot in your book, which gets to exactly what you were saying, is you refer to them as boundless infinities, which I just thought was very poetic. The other aspect to all of this.
Right, it was bounded.
Infinity. Oh, bounded?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry.
It is this paradox.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Yes. Thank you for correcting me. So there's also, though, 4 worlds, right? And can you speak to those?
There are actually endless worlds.
Okay. But there's, I mean, the tree of life is divided. So you've got the top 3, and I think, is that Azilut? I forget. Yeah, Azilut. And then Bria and Yetzirah. And Asiya. How do those 4 worlds work? What are they representing? Because this is going to feed into the book as well.
Well, so there are lots of ways that we can look at what the 4 worlds mean. Let's just start with tarot for a beginning. There are 4 suits in the world of tarot. And each of them corresponds to one of these worlds. Atzilut is the world that is of emanation, that is closest to the divine, at the top of the tree. And I use the word top of the tree very guardedly, because I always try to make the point that there is no up or down here, and there is no hierarchy. These are layers of an onion that are really all one. But we have to be able to talk about it in ways that separate things out, because as human beings, that's how we perceive reality. But from the divine point of view, none of this exists, because it's all one. So Atzilut is at the top. Then you have Bria, which connects to the world of cups in tarot. Then there's Yetzirah, which connects to the suit of swords in tarot. And then Asiya, which connects to the suit of pentacles. But it also connects, if you wanted to look at it from a Jungian point of view, to the 4 Jungian sort of personality archetypes.
Okay.
In fact, in Jung's own study of Kabbalah, he noted this.
Mhm.
And saw all of the parallels to his own understanding of the way consciousness works. And in fact, if you read the great Hasidic teachers of Kabbalah, what you actually come away with is an understanding that for them, Kabbalah is sacred psychology. And they are describing not only all of creation, but the way the mind works, which is no different than the Visuddhimagga. I'm not going to get that right. It's been so many years. The Abhidhamma in
Yeah.
Buddhism,
Buddhism, yeah.
Abhidhamma is the great sort of writing, a psychologization of Buddhist thinking. And both of these traditions have this sort of inner psychology, which in Judaism is meant to mirror the intrapsychic processes of the divine.
All of this is brought together in Tarot. Now, I know that it traditionally, in the way the esoteric traditions work, you've got this tree of life with the 10 Sephiroth, and the top, and Keter, the crown, those are the aces. And then you have, it's Hokmah, I believe, which are the 2s, and Binah, which are 3s. And so all of the Sephiroth correspond to one of the numbers. You also connect the court cards in there as well. And all of the Sephiroth are connected by various paths. And there are 22 paths. And a connection was made between these paths and the Hebrew letters and the major arcana cards. Do I have that right?
Yes.
Okay.
So paths between the Sephiroth, this is deep Kabbalah. It is, going back centuries. And when tarot began to be folded in slowly through the Renaissance, and then the European occultists of the early modern era, they connected the major arcana cards to those Hebrew letters. They actually rearranged the letters on the tree. This is one of the differences between European Hermetic Kabbalah and traditional Judaic Kabbalah, is that they decided to move some things around because they wanted it to conform to a particular system. And what I tell people is, both of these are simply maps of consciousness. And you can work with either of them because ultimately, when you are working with a map of consciousness, you are going to come to a place where the map fails, because the map is not the territory. And so when you get to that place, that's where you hopefully find a spirit guide or find some entity that is going to be able to take you further in this work. Now, I realize that all of this that we're talking about may be even more mystifying to people as I'm trying to say, this is really simple, you can learn it.
Right.
So I want to emphasize that the book really takes you through this in a very graduated and simple way, because as you noted earlier on, so many books about this feel inscrutable. And it was my goal to make this really accessible and simple. And sometimes when I talk about it, because it excites me so much and I love it all, and there are all these correspondences, I will go off and do all of this stuff. And people may say, what? So I just want to emphasize once again that the book will make this very easy for you.
Yeah. And I just wanted to try to clarify things for people who aren't familiar at all. And I already had decided that I'll post links in the podcast and on YouTube to a diagram of the tree of life and the 4 worlds, so that anyone who wants to, they can actually look at it and get a better sense of what we're talking about. The Sephiroth have, I don't know if characteristics or qualities are the right words. Okay, various qualities to each of them. And you give a lot of the keywords in the book, which I think is very helpful. So let's now look at sort of the heart of what you're doing, this counting of the Omer. And how that, what is that? And how then does that, how do you bring the Tarot into that?
Okay. So the counting of the Omer, as I say, it's a traditional Jewish practice with a Kabbalistic overlay. It is actually a biblical commandment that was based on temple sacrifices from a couple of thousand years ago. Of course, there's no temple today, but the commandment is still there. And so the Kabbalists said, we can do this in an interior way. And they connected it to the tree of life and the Sephirot. So this is a 49-day practice in between the second day of Passover and the first day of a holiday called Shavuot, which Christians called Pentecost, which is the 50th day after this 49-day period. And traditionally in Jewish practice, if you think about this mythologically, so on the second day of Passover, what's happening? Well, Moses is leading all of the Israelites out of Egypt. And for the next 49 days, they go through the Red Sea, they wander through the desert, they have their adventures. And on the 49th day, they find themselves at the foot of Mount Sinai, where on the 50th day, the entire group receive a revelation from the divine. And if you read this Exodus, it actually says, and all of them, saw the sounds and heard the sights, as it were. It's a synesthetic experience where everybody has this revelation of the divine. And then Moses goes up and gets the 10 Commandments. And so the practice, as established by the Kabbalists, was to have everyone who practices this sort of ritually join the journey, so that every day you are on the way to Mount Sinai, and the very first day is an experience of the first Sephirah that we count from, which is Chesed. And Chesed is about love and flow and benevolence, and it's really the exact feeling that you feel when you are set free, right? You're experiencing the love of the divine and the flow, right? But you combine it because it's 49 days, and you only count with the lower 7 Sephirot. So each week, one Sephirah is a theme, and then each day you count also one of the lower 7 Sephirot, and you combine them because they have qualities. And when you combine these qualities, you're actually looking at psychologically and spiritually the way you respond to certain things in life. So let's say, let's say it's the second day. And the second day is Gevura of Chesed. And Gevura can be a number of different qualities. Let's say it is structure. And the first Sephirah is Chesed. Let's look at it as creative flow. But this creative flow is such a divine energy that it has no direction. It goes in all directions. It is just flow. So Gevura actually gives it structure and puts it in a direction. So when you're in the second day, you sit with yourself and you think, okay, how do I actually structure my creative practice? How do I give structure to my spirituality? And where does the way I give structure close things down or stop things up? Or where does it break so that it's not really working as it should? So this is every day you're really looking at the combination of these qualities as a way of self-examining your own psyche. So that by the time you get to the 49th day, it's almost as though you've taken a spiritual shower and cleansed yourself of all the blocks in these sephirotic combinations, so that when on the 50th day, you are ready to actually receive your own experience of divine revelation, the energy can flow through you unimpeded. That's the desire, that's the goal, that's the theory. Some years, when I've done this practice, I've had an extraordinary experience of this energy. Some years, well, I do the best I can, and there are still blocks because I'm not the Buddha yet. I'm not the Messiah. It's always going to be that way, but it's still a profound experience. And I learned a lot about myself. And one of the things that happened this year that was really an extraordinary experience for me is that there was a group of tarot enthusiasts in Albuquerque. They have a meetup group, and they decided to read my book on a weekly basis over the course of this period and check in with each other about their experiences with this self-examination. So that they had, as a group, a profound experience at the end. And they invited me to come after they were done and hear what they went through. And I have to say, it brought me to tears. It made me feel like I did what I came here to do, that my mission in life was to write this book, to be able to give people this profound experience. And I was so grateful to hear that from people. It was really moving.
Yeah, it really is a phenomenal book. I stumbled across it at one of my local bookstores, and I remember picking it up, and I just read a couple of pages, and I'm like, I have to buy this book. And this was, I think, back in February is when I first came across it. One of the things that I truly appreciate is, and you've already kind of said this in a number of ways, my approach with tarot, because a lot of people do just think that tarot is for just divination and trying to read the future.
Mm-hmm.
But I always take it back to like the Oracle at Delphi and, going into the sacred space. It said, know thyself. And my approach has always been, that's what it's really for. Yes, there are some times where it can seem to be telling me things that may be happening or going to happen, but ultimately it's about self-work and self-knowledge and self-improvement. So I truly appreciated that about your work. I think something else that is important for people is that this isn't a book of, well, this is what the Six of Cups means. It's not a, an encyclopedia of meaning. It's not that kind of tarot book. You do give meanings as you are meditating and reflecting on these combinations of cards. But it's like it's living in many ways. And sometimes you will have the same two cards. You may have, I don't know, Hode and Netsack and Netsack and Hode, right?
The order, and when you reverse the order, it changes the relationship.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that I think for tarot people, this is one of the great values of the book, I think, is that with each card, because each card turns up at least 13 times in different combinations, you see how the meaning of the card lives in combination with other cards. Because when you get a tarot book and it says, this means this means this means that, well, that's very flat. And what you want is, when you do a reading, is that you want it to really live. You want it to sort of be connected in a way that feels alive. And when you can see how these cards affect each other and how they are related to things within you, all of a sudden, the cards, flat on a table feel dimensional and deeply connected to your own life. And then going back to the question of divination, as I say, I do tree of life readings for people. And sometimes, because they're asking, many people come and they say, I'm at a crossroads in my life. I really don't know what I should be doing next. Can you help give me some direction? And we go through the cards. And the cards can give a sort of a snapshot. I sometimes call it a spiritual MRI of where you are right now. And as I say, because it can show you where you're blocked, it can help you, if you can see where you're blocked, it can help you see past those blocks. You know, I literally just did a reading for a woman who is working for an organization that she feels trapped by. And interestingly enough, one of the first cards that came up was the devil. And in the devil card, you see that there are a couple of people who are chained to a block, but the chains around their necks are so loose that they could lift them off and walk away. And part of the important meaning for this person I was reading for is that you feel trapped, but it is an illusion. You can walk away at any time. But most organizations want you to identify your future with them and not think for yourself, right? But those organizations don't have your highest good in mind. They're about perpetuating the organization. So you have to really be aware of what's important for you on your path. And so when you do this kind of work, when you do a reading like this, it can help you see what you can do to sort of free yourself of illusion. And then it helps you look at your choices and make those choices more consciously. It doesn't say, do this, do that, or you're going to meet a tall, dark stranger, but it does say, in order to meet a tall, dark stranger, you need to do some work around these things. And then you will open up space in your life for something new.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. Whenever I do readings for people, the most common comment I receive is, well, you just told me what I already know.
And actually, before they say it, I usually say, so I'm just telling you what you already know, but here's why it's important to hear it from me and to see it in the cards.
Right.
Because it enables you to look at things from a distance. It enables you to sort of look at your life and where you are objectively as though you're looking down on it from a height. And so that you can see the whole of it. And when you can do that, this gives you the freedom to choose.
Have you ever had the experience going through this? Is it fair to call it a ritual, the counting of the Omer?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So have you ever had the experience as you're going through this and reflecting on these pairs of cards where the pair of the day does seem to represent something that sort of rhymes for that day?
Oh, yes. Yeah. No, that happens, over the course of 49 days. I would say once a week, something like that happens.
Oh, okay.
But it's a reflection, because this is a reflection of my own inner psycho-spiritual processes inside. And of course, that's what I'm living outside. So if I have a problem in a relationship, and it's a week where I'm looking at, or it's a day when two cards come up that are about relationship, it's not going to be a surprise that those cards reflect my psycho-spiritual stuff that are happening right in front of me in this relationship.
Yeah, you cited the Hermetic axiom of as above, so below, but I think Jung added to that, as within, so without.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I do appreciate the fact that you have people reflect on their own interpretations of these cards. You do provide some questions for people to sort of reflect upon. And my guess is that you might also encourage people to journal about this as they're going through this process.
Actually, it was part of my goal to make the book also a journal, but that would mean adding so many pages that the book would be, 20 pounds.
Yeah.
And, so you can just go out and buy your own journal and, sit with the journal next to the book and do the work. You don't need blank pages in this book. But yes, journaling is very much a part of this work.
Okay, very good. The book uses the Rider-Waite-Smith deck to illustrate the various card combinations, and the reflections that you write are based on those.
Yeah.
I assume that any deck can be used.
Well, here's the thing.
Maybe.
I have a bias in favor of decks that are that take the Kabbalistic symbolism as a given, so that it's in there. And there are decks, wonderful decks, beautiful decks, some of which I own because I own about 40 tarot decks. I collect Judaic decks and Kabbalistic decks, but I just got something called the Badass Tarot, right? And there's hardly anything that you could think that's Kabbalistic about it. It's just a fun deck that you can use. I don't know that I would be able to use that because I'm looking for the Sephirah, because in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, because Waite and Smith were in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and for them, the tarot was an expression of Kabbalah, that Kabbalistic concepts are encoded into the imagery. And I think it's helpful if you learn some of this coding, that it will activate something in you, right? Just as, I sometimes also refer to tarot cards as a Renaissance Rorschach test, right? Because you're going to look at the images and they awaken something in you. But these are often Kabbalistic concepts. And so if you're using something that's already connected to the system, I think it will work better. And there are a number of decks that fit that description that are not Waite-Smith decks. I'm not a big fan of Aleister Crowley, but his Thoth deck is based on Kabbalistic principle. And in some ways, his deck is a little more accurate Kabbalistically than the Waite-Smith deck. Not everywhere, but, for example, let's look at pages versus princesses. Waite put in pages instead of princesses, but Kabbalistically, that would be a princess, because this is connected to the Shekhinah, the feminine aspect of God. And let's do a little side note on that for people who don't know about this in Kabbalah. I said that God is beyond gender. So one of the ways God presents, or the divine presents in Kabbalistic Judaism, is as female. There is the face of the divine that is male, and there is the face that is female. And ultimately, the divine is beyond both of those things. But when we enter into the world of duality, the divine splits into both. And part of our job as human beings is to theurgically reunite that couple.
Yeah, I use the Thoth deck quite a bit, and my favorite deck is a Thoth-based deck that is very rich in Kabbalistic imagery.
What is that? I'm curious.
The Tabula Mundi deck.
I'll have to look for it.
It's quite incredible. Just a shout at the artist is Mel Moline, and she and T. Susie Chang have a podcast, Fortune's Wheelhouse, where they go into great detail about
this is great knowledge, these people.
Yeah. And I learned so much from Tarot. It was exponential over like a year just using the Tabula Mundi deck. But one of the things I was getting at in my question is the imagery in the Rider-Waite-Smith, and I know that there are the connections with Kabbalah, but it also seemed to me that some decks, even if they have that lack pictures altogether, I'm thinking like the Marseille decks, that it would be very difficult to do this work with that kind of deck.
Well, so let's actually now go back to Renaissance Italy
Hmm.
And then of course 18th and 17th century France, where we have Etea, you know,
Hmm.
the guy who was one of the first people to talk about tarot as for divination. Well, he was using the Tarot de Marseille. He didn't have images at all. He only had the minor arcana and the images on the pips of the suit symbols. And this is one of the reasons why Ronald Decker actually referred to them as flashcards, because when you see the number, you see like the eight of, and for Tarot de Marseille, it's the eight of coins. You know you're in the world of Asiya. So, and you know that you are with the Sephirah of Hod, because that is the eighth Sephirah. So that gives you the information that you need to know. You don't need to see an image if you already study this. If you haven't studied it, having the imagery certainly helps. But I could use the Tarot de Marseille now to be able to, do this work. It's just that I like the images.
Yeah, I like the images too. And Marseille is kind of inscrutable to me, but honestly, I haven't worked with it that much. So I'm curious. I don't want to ask this. In the book, one of the other things that I appreciate, we're talking about Kabbalah and we've mentioned Buddhism, but you also draw from a lot of the world's wisdom traditions.
Oh, yeah.
Which I think is very helpful and appropriate and inclusive. And it makes it accessible to anyone of any spiritual tradition.
Well, living in the United States, which is a Christian majority nation, it was important to me that this be understandable to people who come from that tradition. And remember, as I pointed out, the period between Passover and Shavuot, that 50th day, is Pentecost, which is a Christian holiday, because the holiday of Pentecost, as it was established in the book of Acts, was the meeting of the apostles for a Shavuot, what is called a Tikkun Leil Shavuot, an evening Shavuot study session to experience revelation. And what happened to them? Revelation. They had tongues of flame come down so that they were all able to go out into the streets and speak in other languages to preach the gospel to other people. Because particularly on Shavuot in Jerusalem, Jews from all over the Roman Empire come back because you're supposed to sort of go back for that holiday. But, if they're coming from Greek, these are Jews who speak Greek. They're coming from Rome, they're Jews who speak Latin. So the apostles had to be able to go out and speak these languages to preach the gospel. And that's the story. And this is, in fact, the origin, of course, of Pentecostalists, except in Acts, these people actually were speaking a language. And because they were meant to sort of spread the good news. And I really wanted to point out that the Christian holiday of Pentecost is well within traditional Jewish understanding of what happens on this holiday. And there is, and the counting of the Omer is in fact the technology, the spiritual technology to get you to that place of having that experience of some kind of revelation. I point out that there's a rabbi named Joseph Caro, who was well known on the eve of Shavuot to be possessed by a Magid, a spirit, an angel, as it were, who spoke through him. So this is sort of spiritual possession, but divine spiritual possession for teaching purposes. And that's part of the possible experience for people on the 50th day. It's not anything that I have encountered yet, but I don't discount it as something that may happen in my experience.
Yeah, and I really appreciated that as well. I teach a course, a community college class on the Western traditions, the Abrahamic traditions, and I had never made the connection between the Jewish tradition, the Passover and Pentecost, with the Christian, and it made so much sense with the Israelites gathered at the mountain and receiving the message from God or the Spirit, and the disciples experiencing it as well.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely going to start including that in all of my lectures, because I think it's important to note.
Another spiritual tradition I want to bring in for just a second is the Eastern traditions in Buddhism, for example. After someone dies, in Tibetan Buddhism, one spends 49 days in the bardo, or the spirit is able to go on, right? 49 days seems to be, from a spiritual technology point of view, an important number, an important amount of time to be able to work through something. The way the counting of the Omer is designed is to actually help you do this consciously.
Right. Now, the way that you present this in the book, you actually give a couple of different options. So someone can do this from, specifically during that holiday period, and you would choose just one of the suits to work with, or you could decide each day which suit you want to work with. You could work with one, and you can extend it beyond this 50 days. So you can do one suit, do the next suit, do the next suit, and do the next suit. I would imagine it would be possible for someone, they wouldn't be able to necessarily tap into the power of the morphic field. But if someone just picks up a copy of the book and says, well, no, that happened a month ago, I don't want to wait 11 months. I want to start now, that they could actually start right now.
The book came out in January of 2020. And as soon as people got it, they started doing the work. So that, 2.5 months later, I was getting emails from people who had done this work saying, wow, this was incredible. Thank you for giving me this experience. And now that I've done it from, beginning of January to, the end of February, I'm going to pick it up again and do the next suit during the actual period. But you can really do it at any time, because every moment is an opportunity to connect to the divine.
Yeah, and I like the idea. On one level, this is individual work, but this notion of connection runs through the book, and it's not just connection with the divine, but connection with community.
This is very important. In Judaism, you cannot do certain kinds of prayer services without there being at least 10 people to hold the energy. All human beings are a reflection of the divine. We are all made in the divine image. And so it is essential that our relationships reflect that consciousness. And so that if one does this work, you have to really approach other people as an expression of God, and that your relationship with that person is holy. And so, what is your obligation in community? What is your obligation to justice? What is your obligation to charity? What is your obligation to healing the sick? All of the things that we are told to do in these holy books are actually, as you do this work, it becomes really clear that this is the path. And the path is doing this work. One of the great medieval books of the path was The Imitation of Christ, right? It's about, how do I live a Christ-like life? Well, this means, working with the poor, working with the sick, right? It is about being generous. And this is for me, one of the great heartbreaks of Christianity, because it is a religion of such beautiful teaching that its own adherents, fail again and again. And I'm, thinking about, for example, you think about just the history of the Southern Baptists. The reason the Southern Baptists came into existence, they broke away from the whole Baptist convention because they were going to defend slavery. Mm. Well, if you think of human beings as all in God's image, slavery is completely, not kosher. And the Bible itself is a Bronze Age book. So it doesn't always reflect the values and the understanding that we have today. But I think it is this, and every religion falls short, and every religious teacher falls short, because we are all human. None of us are perfect. This is also part of the teaching, right? Creation itself is fractured, is broken, and our job is to help repair it and to repair ourselves as well. One of the great teachings there's a part of the Talmud called the Pirkei Avot, the wisdom of the ancestors. And one of the rabbis says, it is not your job to complete the work, but you are not free from being obligated to do it, right? So you will never be finished. You will never be perfect, but you have to aspire to that. And ultimately, hopefully through all of the incarnations, one will then return to the divine home that we all come from.
Yeah, and I like that as well. And the notion that the acknowledgement that this is a broken world and that we're all broken individuals as well. But I think that can be acknowledged and accepted without insisting upon this sort of sinfulness, because there's this notion of, that we have a responsibility to each other and to ourselves to aim as best as we can.
Aim, that's the word. Because in Judaism, there is no word for sin. Mm-hmm. The word that we use is chet. And chet is a term from archery. It means that you have missed the mark. That's all, right? Mm-hmm. Your goal was to hit the bullseye. Okay, you were a few, rings out. You keep trying and you keep working at it. That is the goal. We understand, and perfection is actually beyond human ability. It's just not going to happen, but that's okay. It is the trying that is the important thing.
Yeah, and it also occurs to me that in the book, since you're focused on the Sephiro, beginning with Chesed, number 4, mm-hmm. that first realm, those first 3 Sephirot aren't of this world, and isn't it in Kabbalistic thought that, between those 3 and then the bottom 7, there's like the abyss. And the focus here is on the world that we can experience.
Yes, yes. So, I was thinking about this the other day and how human beings have a limited sensorium, right? We can't see ultraviolet, we cannot see infrared, but there are animals who can. Dogs can hear sounds that we cannot. There are beings, creatures, that sense the world differently than we do. And our senses are devised to actually weed out all of the things that we cannot deal with. This is all we can cope with, right? And so that if the divine energy really hit us full, we would be blasted, our consciousness would be gone, right? So our sensorium is limited. And this means we are limited and are able to express this. So those 3 are beyond our sensorium. That doesn't mean ultimately that we can't get there, because there is work to get there, but it happens when one is doing inner work and disconnected from one's body. Mm-hmm. It is so that your senses your bodily senses are shut down so that your psychic spiritual senses are open to receive the light, the full light. You know, there is an 11th Sephirah, which some people talk about more than others. I don't talk about it in the book because it's not part of the practice that we're going through. But one of the things that one does is if one is working the paths up, because the counting of the Omer is working down. If you're working up, when you get to Chesed, if you've done it well enough, what happens is the Sephirah of Da'at opens. And this is on the sort of chakra overlay. This is the third eye. This is where all of a sudden one has spiritual sight. It's why Rabbi Isaac Luria was able to look at his disciples and see on their forehead the history of all their past lives. You know, when one has this sight, it gives you the ability to be able to see beyond what most people are capable of seeing. Some people are born with some of this ability. There are many people in the world who have psychic abilities. And the best thing is to be able to find a path in whatever tradition resonates for you if you have these abilities as a way of working with them to take yourself farther and to be able to use them in a way that is in service and holy for other people.
One of my personal, I don't know, it's my sort of soapbox, is that I feel that any spiritual practice needs to be grounded in this world.
Yeah.
You know, having that connection is awesome, but especially given our current moment, you know, this is where we need to be.
Okay.
And this is what our focus has to be on, because not only, and I think this is really relevant to the Kabbalah, but again, you know, not only do we have to heal ourselves, but we have a physical world that we have to heal.
Right. And a psychological world.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I refer to this in the book. Kabbalistically, this is called the Briatic defense, that one flees to the upper realm as a way of avoiding the lower realm.
Mm-hmm.
In psychology, that is called spiritual bypassing. And we all know people who are spiritual bypassers who are living on pink clouds. Everything is wonderful. And if something negative happens, they just chant and they try to not experience their own anger or anything that they're going through, because those feelings and what's actually happening is too threatening. But that's where the gold is. That's the work. That's why we are embodied. This life, and this is the thing within Judaism, there's no duality between matter and spirit. And there's no sort of sinfulness or feeling separate from the divine by being embodied. This life is a gift, and we are meant to use it to sort of experience the whole of reality.
Well, I think your book is a gift to help people. I really do. It's probably one of the best tarot books I've read. It really was phenomenal. I had dinner. I have a very good friend who's she describes herself as a secular Jew, and I'm always doing tarot readings for her. And I told her, I'm like, no, you have to get this book because she's looking for something for her own spiritual journey. Mm-hmm. And I think that what I'm going to do is offer to go through it with her, because getting back to that, working in community, you also noted that in Kabbalah, there was this tradition of two people studying together, yes, which I found very beautiful.
Actually, it's in Judaism as a whole. If you go into any yeshiva, the students are divided into twos. You have a chaver, a friend, a spiritual friend, and you work in chavruta, a pair, as a way of examining each other's souls and sort of challenging each other to go deeper in ways that are loving.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I think too often the spirituality tends to be a bit narcissistic.
Mm.
I do believe it has to happen in community and with others. So I know that we're going to start running out of time here, but I wanted to ask you, for anyone who might be interested in learning a little bit more about Kabbalah, where would you direct them?
Oh, goodness. Well, let's start with a book called God in My Body
Hmm.
by Rabbi J. Michelson. It is deeply Kabbalistic, and it is non-dual,
Hmm.
right? And so it's about all of this living in you.
Hmm.
I'd say start there. Start with something practical and grounded. There are a lot of, I could mention lots of other books. I've been looking at a whole bookcase here and I've been behind over there. But I'm afraid of, bringing up something that is so complicated because I've been doing this for so long.
Hmm.
And I think that, Jay's book, it will be exactly the right thing, the right way to start.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, my background is academic. So when I was a graduate student, I took a course in Kabbalah. So I can always recommend, those kind of books. I'm like, oh yes, read Gershom Scholem, but that doesn't really get you into the heart of the practice at all. So I'm always curious to ask people who practice this where to go.
Yeah, because Gershom Scholem, essential, a great scholar, and because one of the things you probably noticed, and people may be surprised when they get this book, there are more than 200 footnotes.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to read the footnotes,
Yeah.
but it was important for me because I am a scholarly kind of person.
Mm-hmm.
And the history and the groundedness in history of this is important to me. There are so many tarot books which make all of these wild claims which have no evidence whatsoever. And it's important to me to be able to show the receipts, as the kids say, right? That, as I say, it's important to me, but I don't think that anybody needs that if they're just starting out. The academic stuff I love, and that's why I'm sort of studying all this Renaissance stuff. But that's for me, because I love it. It's not part of the practice. It's just part of my scholarly detective game that I love. But it's not part of the practice.
Well, it could be I'm thinking I think it was Alan Watts. There's a quote that Alan Watts asked Joseph Campbell what he did as a spiritual practice. And Campbell's response was, I underline books.
Oh God. I can actually, one right over here that is filled with underlining.
Yeah, for sure. So, well, where is the best place for people to find out more about your work if they're curious?
My website is gatesoflighttarot.com, all one word, Gates of Light Tarot. You can also find me on Instagram as @GatesOfLightTarot. On Facebook, there is a page for the book.
Okay.
It's Facebook/Tarot Gates. And of course, you can go to bookshop.org, where you can buy a copy of the book from an organization that supports independent bookstores instead of sending Jeff Bezos into space.
Yes, I actually always include a link to bookshop.org in the show notes and on YouTube. Because
if you read the book and want to write a review on Amazon, I won't say no.
Yeah. But we certainly don't need to make Jeff Bezos any richer than what he already is. So, all right. Well, I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I thank you so much for your time and for your work.
The opportunity. As you know, this is work that I think is of benefit to others. And so any opportunity that I have to help other people find this work and do it so that they can sort of increase their connection to the divine and to others that they know in their relationships, that's a good thing.
It is a good thing, and it's desperately needed right now. Yeah. So, Mark, thank you so much. And that's a wrap on episode 6 of Rebel Spirit Radio. Thank you so much for listening. I really, truly appreciate it. If you enjoyed this podcast, please make sure to give it a positive review on whatever platform you use to listen to podcasts. We are currently streaming on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Amazon, and a few others. Your reviews really do help. And please consider subscribing. For those viewing on YouTube, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you will be informed when I upload new content. For the time being, I'll be releasing episodes every other week with the goal of releasing them every week in the near future. Also, please consider making a donation via Patreon by becoming a sustaining member, or you can make a one-time donation via PayPal. You can find links for both in the video description or show notes. Your support makes this podcast possible. I'm Nick Mather, and you've been listening to Rebel Spirit Radio. Until next time, may you be in peace and flourish in all possible ways.